You are tuned in to Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr.
Well, hello. It's me again, Preston Love Jr., and we're glad to once again be taping our monthly podcast, webinar, if you will, on the Ernie Chambers Network on YouTube. I hope that you have enjoyed the few shows that we've done so far. The problem that I have is, as always, I have 3 hours worth of thoughts to share with you and about 30 minutes with you. Today, I have somewhat of a heavy heart to begin the show with, and I've tried to give you enough background so that, in fact, you will be with me mentally and spiritually and sensitively as I just talked to you about myself. When I was 41 years old. 41 years old, for the record, was essentially 40 years ago. I'm 80 now, but essentially when I was 41, and a friend of mine was also 41, going to be 42 a few months before me. And I want to talk about he and I as what now, in reflection, were young men. We were young men. We were young men. And 40, we, at that time, thought we were all of that maturity, and thought we had the wisdom of life. We were only 40. It was me, and the other fellow's name was Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson. During those days in the early 80s, 83 and 84 to be exact, Jesse Jackson, Reverend Jesse Jackson, was considering the idea of running for the presidency of the United States. And he was living in Chicago, had some contacts in almost a small office in Washington, D.C., but Chicago-based, but was constantly moving around the United States and came to Atlanta regularly, where I was, and working for a very, very close friend and cohort, Reverend, I should say, Andrew Young. Reverend Andrew Young. He didn't carry the moniker of Reverend the days that I'd known him. He was a man of God, however, not a pastor, but a man of God. I was working with Andrew Young in his administration. I was a hot shot in his administration, having helped him get elected to the mayorship in 1980, and then working with him as one of his 3 appointees as he took office. I had several jobs. Initially, I was the director of the Department of Budget and Management. I went on to run the General Services Department as a director. I was later the Commissioner of Planning. And then later, they asked me to run the Computer Department. I forgot what they called it. It was some fancy name, but I was all of that with Andrew Young in a very short time. It was kind of almost his utility guy. There were 2 other people who were appointed, one of which went on to become the mayor of Atlanta in former days. Her name was Shirley Franklin. To get back to my story, I hope I don't use up all of my time just in the introduction. but it surely could be said that I was working there, of course, with Andrew Young. And the truth of the matter is that Jesse Jackson used to visit often. He and Andrew Young were dear friends, having worked together as part of the Martin Luther King's entourage, and then later as Jesse Jackson moved to Chicago and started Operation Push. I hope that you would enjoy or remember some of that amazing history. It seemed so simple at the time. But in 82 and 83, Jesse would travel to Atlanta, visit Andrew Young. I had never met him. I hailed Reverend Jesse Jackson because of his work in Operation Push in Chicago at a high level. I surely idolized him and was awed in his presence. He was a monster of a man. Even at that time, he was not only appeared to be smart, he was a great speaker. He was very handsome at that time. And so he was an awesome figure. And I say that in the context of living in Atlanta and having been around many, many awesome figures, including Andrew Young and the most marvelous, fantastic leader that I've ever known, quite frankly, personally, and that was Mayor Maynard Jackson. My story is that during those days, without a half hour worth of background, during those days, there was the idea of African American running for president. Now, I might mention historically that 1972, Shirley Chisholm ran. Shirley Chisholm, Congresswoman from Brooklyn, ran for president. She was a wonderful candidate. She was extremely intelligent. She had much to say, but she, in modern history, made history by running. Her candidacy did not catch on and did not stir a lot of excitement in the Black community, other than respect. She received little or no electoral, I should say, delegate votes. And so her candidacy is historically noted. But there was a desire that needs a little setup. And that is in 1983, Harold Washington historically became the first Black mayor of Chicago, the third largest city in the United States had a Black mayor. And not only that, but Chicago. And so that incident in 83, I would, on another tape, could share with you my involvement with Harold Washington's election in 83 in Chicago, in spite of the fact that I was living in Atlanta. Oh, it's a complex story, but I was there in Chicago during the last months, I should say, of his candidacy to become mayor in 83. But after his victory, there was several meetings of the Black leadership throughout the U.S., the Black leadership, mostly political. And the short version is, well, if we could win Chicago, then we could run and possibly be successful on the national stage and run a Black to represent our community for the presidency of the United States. That was the dialogue in 1983. They polled the leaders, and there were many. There was Maynard Jackson. There was Andrew Young. There was Gary. There was Richard Hatchett from Gary. There were a number of giants politically in that day. And so they kind of pulled the room and the meetings, and no one, in spite of the fact that they felt collectively that it should be done, no one held up their hands. And so the meeting was left, I should say meetings were left without a candidate. And so unbeknownst to all of those members, there was one in the room who was thinking, well, I can do it. And that was Jesse Jackson. That was in early, mid 1983, 83. The long fast forward to the other part of 83 is Jesse Jackson decided to test the waters, if you will. And he did it using several techniques. One, he went throughout the southern states, the hard-nosed southern states, Mississippi, Georgia, Alabama, and more. And he went into the barrios and the ghettos amongst the people and registered them like crazy. And out of that phenomena came another phenomena, which was run, Jesse, run. Run, Jesse, run. That phenomena was saying, Jesse, we want you to run for president. And that was in 83. I tell you this story because during the latter days of the Run, Jesse, Run days, yours truly was with Jesse first of all, every weekend, and then after taking a leave of absence every day, and then was asked to organize and possibly run a potential candidacy for Jesse Jackson. I accepted, took a leave of absence from Andrew Young to develop and to organize and to implement a campaign for Jesse Jackson to run for president. Back to my original point. He was going to be 41 or 2, and I was going to be 40 or 41. And so we were young guys thinking we were old cats. And as you know, the history of it all is that he did, in fact, run for president. And it began in 83 and went through the entire year of 84, and then on to the actual general election, which Mondale became the nominee for the Democratic Party, but Jesse Jackson had a tremendous campaign. He received over 500 delegates, which was more than historic, but more than that, the Black community was all in for Jesse, the entire Black community, I would say. I use the word entire loosely, but mostly the Black community was solidly behind Jesse Jackson. I will pen a little note on the history of it all, was that while he was the choice of the masses, there were Black leaders who weren't sure because they had personal interest, and his candidacy worked against that. My point to bring all of this up, beside I enjoy telling the story, is that in the last week, today I'm taping on Wednesday, last Friday, I joined Reverend Jackson for his 81st birthday. If he was 81, I'm 80, going to be 81 next. the two young cats, as I call us, the two young people, Jesse Jackson running for president, his campaign organizer and manager, Preston Love Jr., reunited last week in Chicago for a large gala in his honor. I thought it was going to be wonderful celebration and remembrance. It was, but my beloved, I say to you, it was very, very emotional. As I recall, the two young guys, 41 and 42 in those days, and then the reuniting last week. Jesse, Reverend Jesse Jackson, is wheelchair bound. And he, who above so many was known for his oratory, has lost his ability to speak clearly and with any kind of rhythm. His speech is impeded. To see him that way was emotional because my memory is so clear about the two young 40-year-olds in 83 and in 84. Not only was that emotional, but I reunited with his wife, Jackie. She looked well. She had been through a lot. I could recall the trauma of the things she had to go through all of her life. Some of them don't require repeating, but I surely have respect for Jackie Jackson. She and I always hit it off very well. She used to ask me to make sure of this and make sure of that as Jesse and I were on the road. She would often call me to prevent Jesse to do something he might want to do, or to tell me to have him do something that he didn't want to do. And I have great many stories to tell you about that. Jackie and I were very close. And then they had 4 kids, a little girl, an older sister, and 3 boys, Yusef, Johnny, and Jesse Jackson Jr., who went on to become congressman from Chicago. You may know the story. I don't want to be part of that repeating, but he lost his seat and spent some time in prison for misusing campaign funds. His middle son, Johnny, hear me now, is going to be taking that seat years later after his older brother, and years later, historically, Jesse Jackson's middle son will become congressman from Chicago in that same district. My emotions were raw as I hugged Yusef and hugged one of the daughters who was there, and as I hugged Jackie, and as I stared and hugged and held his hand of the Reverend Jesse Jackson. It was an emotional event. People were abound everywhere. The event, the gala, was it was a tremendous gala. It was a tremendous gala. It was emceed by the famous and celebrity Tamara Hall. And there were so many guests. The mayor of Chicago spoke and was there. She's about 2 foot tall, but she was there. Many celebrities sent videos. I actually sent a video as well. Bill Clinton, many of the sports heroes and owners of teams, and so many sent videos. Some of them were great and memorable. I sent a message via video too, because I was asked to join the others. I went personally, but I want to share with you in the short minutes that we have left the point that I wanted to make and did make on my video, and I make with you now for historical sake. When Jesse Jackson's legacy and his history will be told, it will be said that he was a great orator and that he worked with Martin Luther King and that he started Operation Breadbasket and some great educational and economic initiatives in and out of Chicago. But his legacy is going to be rooted in his run for president in 1984 and in 1988. That's going to be part of his legacy. And I urge the family, the friends, and to Jesse that he needed to manage his own legacy, not leave it up to the news media. His legacy has some untold parts that I was part of. I will share with you one of those legacy stories and the impact of Jesse Jackson in the 80s. When we were running, the two young kids, 41, 42, one running for president, one running for everything, because we had so many things on our plate. In the early 80s, to remind you, African Americans were not in the national media with great jobs like you see now. They're in every part. You see them on every network, on every cable show. Well, not everyone, surely don't see them on Fox, but you do see them. And you see them in representing the major national type newspapers. You see them everywhere now, but in '83, they were only a handful. One in NBC, one at CNN, one in CBS, one at ABC, maybe two somewhere. And they were sprinkled among the national media, including media like Time Magazine and also CNN. They were single, and they were not receiving important assignments. They were tokens, mostly. They were brilliant people, but they were tokens in the media. And so the legacy, hear me through. And that is when Jesse was running for president, all of those networks, all of those affiliations said, well, you, black person, you go over and cover Jesse. You go cover Jesse. Almost disrespectfully. And they did. And guess what? Jesse made so much news and was so significant to the nation in his candidacy, those black reporters got the best assignments in the nation, and they became their own superstars, and it opened up the door from that point on for a skyrocket of blacks in the media. That should be in his legacy. And so I tell that story, and before I close the web today, I want to urge all of you to know that on future shows, I'm going to be talking to you about the toxic air being spewed by coal burning, by Omaha Public Power District, and some of the things that we're trying to do about it. Stay tuned for that. And then I want to leave you with this final comment. As we, at the point of this taping, there's only 2.5 or so weeks left before the election. May I say to you, oh my goodness, what's wrong with a community that has so much at stake and has so many needs and so many good things that could happen by voting. And yet we sit sometimes in the barbershop and the beauty parlors and talk about that my vote doesn't make any sense and I don't care about that. And I say to you, oh, how wrong you can be. Very intelligent, wonderful people can be so wrong. We need not to understand these things that way. Ladies and gentlemen of North Omaha, you don't realize that if we don't vote, we don't count. And the things that we are fighting for and need to fight for doesn't get done by the people who could care less about it. And the people who could care less about it get elected mostly, in most cases, because we don't handle our business at the polls. And not only that, we have things at stake. We have, in this election, we have the chance of having maybe a change in the federal. We have a Republican, I don't care about Democrats and Republicans this way, but in this state, it's not good for any state to be ruled by one party, whichever party that it is. We need not to be ruled by that. In this state, we have the same party as the governor, the same party as Secretary of State, the treasurer, and all of those jobs, the same party for both of our senators, the same party for all 3 of our congressmen, the same party in Omaha as the mayor. That's a dictatorship for us. And we can't wedge our interest in the middle of all of that. And we don't have access. There's 2 senators probably never even stepped their foot in North Omaha. We need to stop that. We have an opportunity to make a difference in the congressional races by voting and voting strong. And so many of the other races. For county attorney, we need to vote. For Dave Pantos. And for school board, we need to vote strongly. And so vote for some of the people that we know, our friends, people we see every day out in the community working. And don't miss the point. We need to vote, and vote for the sheriff's job. I'm voting for Greg Gonzalez. So vote who you want to. That's who I'm voting. My point to you is not so much who, but in some cases, yes, who, but that we need to make our community count, to use our leverage and use our power by voting. We need to do that, because if we don't count. Nobody cares. You should know that people like me are fighting battles with politicians. And sometimes we go up there and say, such and such, and they say, I don't care what you say. Your people don't vote. Don't make me no difference. I get elected without you. Yes, that's the reality. So I say to you as I close the show, thank you for listening to my story about 2 young men who have turned out to be 2 older guys, Jesse Jackson and Preston Love. I'm 80, he's 81, and we're still kicking. Thank the Lord. Thank Jesus for what we are and what we have been and where we are going. I'm not through yet. Jesse doesn't feel that he's through yet. Pray for him and pray for me. Thank you.
This has been Love Your History, hosted by Preston Love Jr. If you'd like to leave suggestions, email us at ewcfacts@gmail.com. That's ewcfacts@gmail.com. This is an EWC Communication production.